Bingo, bango, bongo. Dima Belianin back in the podcast, my friend. How's it going?
It's going well, as always.
Brilliant. This special series that we are producing together with RedCore live from Sigma Rome. And of course, we had to invite one of my favorite people, Dmitry Belianin, a man of many hats, of course. But if we summarize it into one, I would say the Oracle of gaming, perhaps. What do you think of that title?
I mean, I don't mind, first of all, yeah, but I try to call myself entrepreneur first and foremost, and then investor sometimes.
I like it. And today, we have a pretty exciting announcement from your side. Obviously, you are now entering the operator landscape, launching your own B2C essentially.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to give too much of a blurb here in the beginning. I'll just let you talk about this. What is the new operator B2C brand that you are launching?
Yeah, I mean, it's going pretty much back to where I left it 2 years ago, and I feel like the last 2 years of my journey were so insightful, so passionate, working with people, investing in companies, co-founding companies. It's been a blessing, and I kind of, it's hard to say I kind of got bored, but maybe at the same time I felt like there is a niche which is still not yet covered by pretty much anyone and still available, and this is where I wanted to make a statement. So this is pretty much where the idea came from. The way I kind of try to position it, I call it the ultimate player engagement platform, right? Because if you think about the current landscape, everyone calls themselves an operator brand, right? So you just have one USP, one business model, you monetize through a casino or sports betting or DFS, whatever the revenue stream is, and then that's pretty much it. I think in one of our previous conversations, I mentioned that I don't like looking at, the marketing and the user engagement as the funnel. I don't think this is a right statement anymore. I look at it more as a life cycle. So I want to be able to build a life cycle which gets a player immediately engaged, and then the whole life cycle keeps driving. So he's getting more engaged, he's enjoying, he's recommending his friends, and the whole life cycle kind of kicks in. So this is where I think we sit. And if you're looking at what Menace is a combination of essentially 3 key elements. So in order to be able to build a powerful brand, and this is what we want to achieve, to build a cult following brand, as long as the same brands like Nike or Apple did it in a very spectacular fashion, we want to do the same. And in order to do it, we started as the media company. So we built a community of followers of 2.5 million, I think, right now. People MMA fans, paddle fans. We actually own the largest paddle account on Instagram right now. It's actually funny that people like Tom Holland, they're actually following us.
No way.
Yeah, they're in our posts. I'm when I see it and people send in these screenshots, I'm being so grateful for what we built. So yeah, the media company is the most important, I would say, element of that puzzle, because you need to build reach, you need to build trust, and you need to build and inject the right set of brand attributes. So we're building this a masculine, bold, edgy, kind of sometimes degenerate driven brand. And I want to build a brand where, no matter it's like a water or maybe dog food, you attach Menace brand to it and this will fly, right? This is what I want to achieve. So media is a core. And then we got the product, which I do believe that it's very hard to compete and build innovation in that space right now. You're looking at, Bet365, who's built the absolute best sports betting product in the market, Superbet, all these guys, they've nailed it, right? In order to be able to compete, you need 5 years of a hardcore development in order to build something even half of good of what they've done. So as long as we have a decent product, I'm fine with it. I don't want to super go crazy about it. So this is a second business, an operator within that space. And then the third one is actually the reason why the player are actually coming to play with you is the content, right? Everyone has pragmatics, everyone has evolution, I don't mind, these are great products and obviously we'll have them as well, but I want to build something unique. So this is where we came up with our own game provider studio, where we don't want just to build a set of original games, as everyone got, Plinko, Crash, Mines, whatever. We wanted to build like a proper mix of chaos, degenerate mechanics, like crazy multiples. Game provider, which we called Ebaka, which is also like quite an interesting narrative. We got dog like as a mascot as well. So, and this is like one of our USPs where we have our own content, which is going to be available only for Menace in the first like maybe 3 months or so. And then it's going to be respawned into the market to be able to kind of integrate in other providers. So we want to brand these games as hard as possible, to use our brand power to be able to inject the whole like, you know, brand awareness into them, educate the players, and then they become like a demanded content with other with other operators as well, right? So this is actually something which, you know, guys from Shuffle did just recently. When they've launched the origami game provider, I was like, oh my god, this is like exactly what we wanted and exactly what we've planned since day one, right? So when such a smart people like, you know, like Noah or Ishan, they've done it, I was like, okay, we're doing the right thing, right? So this is where I was like, okay, we're moving in the right direction. So it's a combination of three. I know for sure that we will have more because, you know, the whole ecosystem needs to be able to cater to all the players' needs, whether it's like free-to-play content, whether it's like, you know, challenges, like scratch cards, whatever the product we will come up with in the future. But I just want to make sure that, you know, player stays within the ecosystem, he's engaged like overall in 360, and, you know, and then we just build it from there.
Brilliant. Let's focus on the brand itself for as a starting point, which was one of the three legs as you mentioned. So, you know, in the gambling industry, operators are pretty commoditized, as you mentioned as well. It's the same game, same layout. The brands are pretty generic, so on and so forth. And you mentioned the brand of Nike, for example, which also sells a commodity. They just sell shoes, right? But when you think of Nike, you think of something more than just a shoe. That's the idea, right? And so can you talk about, with Menace as a brand, you already built great presence in social media, but how do you build a brand which just means something else than a commodity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will start with one step earlier. So if you look at the current landscape, you have a set of amazing companies. Bet365, Stake, Betano, like all these guys, they build brilliant brands, companies, but no one actually understands what is the brand essence of Bet365 or Stake. I think I mentioned like once on, in one of my LinkedIn posts, we do a lot of surveys through Blask or like some other researches I'm doing. We've studied 60,000 people's opinions about brands and their like gambling behaviors in particular. Everyone can understand and recognize Bet365's brand identity. You know, the color, the logo. No one has a clue what the brand is.
Right.
No one wants to belong to the brand like that. They want to be able to spend their time within that product, place a bet, make some money, and that's pretty much it. The same with Stake. They have a very distinctive brand identity, but do they have a set of like a sense of belonging? I don't think so, right? And to be able to do that, you need to kind of accomplish a proper shift in mentality of the player, where you're coming up with a set of intangible assets and intangible attributes of a brand. So that's what we will try to achieve. To properly do that, we've kind of deconstructed the current gambling landscape and the player's mentality. You know, what kind of key attributes a brand should have, you know, whether it's trust, whether it's like, you know, like masculinity, which I mentioned. So we've came up with like a set of attributes, and I'm looking at the brand always like as the mathematician. I don't want to say that the brand is like, you know, like untouchable, intangible essence. It is, but in order to be able to achieve that sense of overwhelming belongingness, you need to come up with a set of attributes, and that's what we've done. So we came up with a very like data-driven approach to create the ultimate best possible brand for iGaming. So obviously we had a lot of names, and Menace came up as like one of the key which we thought might become like a true essence of the player's mentality and the spirit, where everyone is a menace, right? If you think about yourself, you're like a proper menace in this industry. You're creating great content. You're a thought leader. You're like one of the biggest, you know, thought leaders in this space, right? You are a Menace, right? If I'm like, I don't know, playing paddle tonight and, absolutely killing it, like I am a Menace tonight, right? So I want to create an environment where everyone becomes a Menace and he becomes like a part of the ecosystem. I don't want him to be able to think, okay, that's a brand I play with. No, that's my brand. I'm a part of that brand. I'm a part of that story. And this is where I think like Nike or Apple, which you mentioned, they did create that absolute spirit of belongingness where, I'm not using the shoe, I'm a part of the culture. I'm not wearing like a sportswear. I'm embracing the spirit of challenge and the competition and winning, right? That's what I want to achieve, and this is where brand of Menace is coming from. I know for sure that we'll not be able to build the absolute best products within the next 2 to 3 years, but whether we'll be able to build a home where players they well taken care of, they have a right friend within the brand's name and founders and the whole team, I'm sure we will.
Brilliant. And if you think about all other brands out there of the industry, are there any other good examples of any brand, perhaps as an operator or otherwise in the industry, that have done a really great job in creating that type of persona, let's say, or that have gone further than just the others, would you say?
I think I would mention a few. The absolute number one probably will be Paddy Power. So
right,
this is the brand where like it's a very unique tone of voice with like a proper community, set of belonging, like items, and then you have this like a crazy lineup of like characters they worked with, ambassadors, like football clubs, etc. So undisputed number one. The number two for me will probably be Poker Stars, because these guys, they've created that spirit of poker itself, right? So I do feel like they've done a great job with like tailoring their brand identity, its story, and then highlighting it with like a proper set of brand ambassadors back then. I think they had pretty much like all the biggest football players with them like back then, a set of like great poker pros as well. So I think this is like my ultimate number two. And it's very hard to come up with someone like recent. Like, I mean, I'm just trying to spin it through my head. Like I said, I like Steak. I really like the company itself and the brand identity, but I don't feel like I like the brand itself.
No, exactly. I feel like most perhaps entrepreneurs and CEOs, let's say, of the operators are mostly product people, right? So in terms of marketing, they are perhaps not thinking in these like deeper terms of creating this like above and beyond type brand, and that's perhaps where we see a lot of generic brands out there that don't really stand for anything. We recognize them, as you say, but they don't really feel like you belong to the brand. I always say that the ultimate proof of the strongest possible brand that you can create is if you sell if you create a brand that is not like a fashion brand or anything, but if you can still sell merchandise. So say like Red Bull is a drink, and people are willing to pay to wear their brand. Right. That is like the ultimate proof of an incredible brand. So I always say like that is like the ultimate goal. When you build a brand like this, is like when you can sell merchandise and people buy it. That's like when you've succeeded.
I agree.
So building an operator, okay, you have a great brand, great ideas around how to differentiate yourself in the market. You recognize that you won't be able to compete on product level against the Bet365s of this world. Nonetheless, it's not cheap to build an operator brand, right? So I'm keen to ask a little bit of the scale of how you're trying to build this operator brand. Are you trying to be cost aware? Are you choosing your markets really wisely and tightly? How is your strategy looking to expand and grow this company? The moment when we started, no one, including myself, even hesitated saying that it's going to be a $1 billion company within 3 years. With the list of assets I mentioned, with the media company, with the operator and its own content, if we do the things properly and we kind of create that amplification effect between all three, this is where the whole kind of snowball effect will kick in. So this is thing number one. Thing number two is definitely not cheap. In order to be able to scale media, and like as many probably aware, is like media not printing money, right? It's a very hard and challenging business.
And there are a few really beautiful examples of companies who's built media and then started like a brand extension or a surrogate, like, ESPN Bet, LiveScore Bet, like, Sky Bet, for example. So these guys, they've done a great job, but we're like lean, and we're very data driven, and we try to save like as much as possible, but to be able to deliver the scale as much as possible as well. So we started as like a crypto first company where it's easy to go to market, and I think one of my key I would say findings throughout this like 2 years of investments was to ship products fast, ship products recklessly fast, and not to think about the consequences, because you can delay the launch for as many years as possible, but it's never going to be ready enough. I don't think there is no definition of ready, right? It's always like work in progress. So ship as fast as possible. So the product went live in pretty much like 2 months, right? The 1st of September was the public live kind of mode. And it's lasted for like two months, like 2.5 months. And this is where, I said like, okay, as long as we have product which converts, as long as we have retention and players which, are half satisfied, we'll find a way on how to make them happy, like overall. So that was the plan. Ship fast, test, and to be able to adjust based on the feedback, and then like implement all the changes fast, and then, reroll the cycle. After that, obviously going like fully regulated. So that's the goal, right? There is a lot of great markets in the world. Being a co-founder of Bask, I have a luxury of looking at so much data, and I've been like crazy obsessed with data. Looking at, is this like Poland a great market? Why? What kind of brand penetration of like these particular companies, and why? Because for example, like I mentioned Superbet, I really like this company, right? And looking at what they've done, how they've done it, allow me to understand how to like step by step navigate in the certain market, win market share step by step. Is this the product driven company? Is this a marketing driven company? So a lot of like little things like this. So we've identified a set of markets. So we'll go into a few small European jurisdictions. We'll go to the Spanish-speaking Latin America, obviously like fully regulated, getting the license, etc. And this is where it's going to be like phase 2, the way I call it. So phase now is like go to market fast, crypto first, being like super compliant with like all the possible, regulatory restrictions, and then go live with the phase 2, probably like early next year with a license. And then, as long as we fly the way we want it, go to like tens of markets. So I hope that within the next 3 years we'll have at least like 25 to 30 markets live.
Brilliant. And in terms of, you mentioned going to markets very fast is really important, shipping product fast and so on. How are you thinking on kind of vertical integration, building your own tools, softwares, your own integrations, and so forth, versus just working with a lot of suppliers, or kind of finding fast solution on a product level in order to go live first? Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe short term, medium term, and what are like the main suppliers you're working with, if I can ask?
So that's a great question. So I do believe that in order to be able to go live fast, you need to replace some of the most important ecosystem elements with the ready-made products. I'm talking about the CRM, I'm talking about the affiliate platform, I'm talking about, PAM in some cases, like I'm talking about, the key infrastructure objects, which is very hard to build and impossible to build world's class best, right? And especially if you want to go live fast. So this is thing number one. Thing number two is that the bigger we will become at some point, I don't mind replacing them, as long as I know that something which we will build will be efficient enough and good enough to be able to replace it. I don't want to be replacing them just because I want to have my tool instead of someone's. I don't mind paying, like commissions or like provider fees. That's fine. This is how industry is working right now, right? But I want to be able to know for sure that if I build something, there is a USP which is hard to replicate, and this USP will be super useful for my business. So we started live with pretty much a standard set of like third-party items, like a Filka for the affiliate platform, customer.io for CRM, like all the basic things. I don't want to go like super hardcore into like months of integrations of certain products, which I want to have, as long as they're doing things like good enough for that particular so like phase of the company. Because if you think about the micro optimizations, yes, of course, the button which is not red but like rounded and green will convert like better at some point. But this is micro optimization, and to be able to achieve that level of micro optimization where I will see tangible results of my business, I need to have like a crazy scale, like thousands of players, like hourly, daily, whatever, right? So yeah, start lean, start fast, ship recklessly fast, admit mistakes you've done on the way, educate yourself constantly, improve, adapt, use third-party tools, and that's the way to succeed.
Brilliant. And so you mentioned Afilka as your affiliate platform, that's SoftQuiz, of course. Do you want to talk about some of the main suppliers that you have outside of that, or is that your secret cards? Because I'm curious to hear your analysis of kind of why do you choose Afilka, for example, versus other platforms. Quickly, if you want to go through a little bit.
Of course. Yeah, so I mean, Afilka was quite shout out to Afilka guys. They build a great product. So I think the idea here is quite simple. So we've partnered with a company which helped us to launch a turnkey, right? I don't want to mention the company, maybe I will in the future, right? But we had a very interesting deal with them where they help us to go live fast and we'll be able to buy their code. So that was the plan since day one, right? As a part of that agreement, maybe I have to reveal the company's name, but trust me, we've done a crazy research in the market to go to the company, which, the question was like, will you help us to go live fast? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Is the turnkey available to scale this fast? Okay. Yes. And then can we buy the code? Nope. Okay. Gone. Next one. So I think there were like a short list of like 10 companies, I think, at some point where the whole checklist was green, and we were thinking, okay, are these the right guys from like mentality point of view, from security point of view, from trust point of view, like many things like this. And then you see like what kind of standard integrations these guys had and whether we want to replace them or not. So I feel in this particular case became one of the industry standards in affiliate marketing, where it's trusted from the affiliate point of view, trusted from the operator's point of view. And I know this is the product which will allow us to scale until a certain point. I don't mind using it. So.
Yeah. Is that a good strategy, do you feel? Say, for example, like companies looking to choose their platform. There are, 100 platform providers out there kind of doing similar things. It's very hard to know exactly where to go, right? There are the bigger ones that we see out on the banners. There are the smaller ones that are trying to break in, kind of thing. So difficult for new operators to choose the right supplier in this sea of different providers. There's not enough time maybe to sometimes, distinguish which is the best one and so on. What was your advice for new operator enters trying to navigate this really complex sea of choosing the right supplier in whatever vertical it may be?
I don't know how I would have done it without any industry experience, to be honest. I think this would have been one of the toughest puzzles to crack, especially when I started my journey in this industry. My advice here will be very simple. So first, start with markets. So if you want to launch, let's say in Mexico, you go to market research tools like Vask, for example, or just Google itself, and you see who are the top operators in the market. And let's say I want to become number 10, amongst top 10 in the market within the next 3 years. I'm going and checking which products they have. I'm checking the requirements for the products they have. And then, if possible, I need to check, are they running on third-party platform or not? So if this Mexico is your market, and if you've noticed that some of the biggest operators using some third-party platform, that's your choice. Why? Because they made a great product, because it's fighting for such a high ranking market share. They've probably onboarded thousands of players. They probably made all the possible mistakes you could have made, etc. So this is number one thing. Number two thing is for me, this is the industry about people. I want to work with great people. If someone has built a great product but not the right mentality, not the right psychotype, I'm not going to work with these guys, right? Many says this cliches, don't work with douchebags and etc. I have the same mentality. I want to be able to work with people with whom I don't mind spending hours locked in the same room, working on the same problems we have, etc. So probably number two for me is people. And number three in my particular case was whether I can buy a code or not. But for many, it's probably not the right case. So I would then replace the third one with thinking about things how scalable that product is outside of the market which I wanted to launch as the market number one, let's say Mexico in this case. Can this platform be turned into like a European platform or not? If yes, then what kind of tweaks they need to be achieving at that point? Because I rarely believe in like operators which are only live in one territory, because I feel like this is where business is operating inefficiently, and every business should be scaling to like at least a few markets to be able to maximize its ROI and the skill set in presence. So this would have been my advice number 3.
Great advice, Dimon. And so you mentioned, of course, that you are launching Menace as a crypto casino. I'm curious to know, some of the biggest launches recently, I would say Shuffle as a great example, have also launched their crypto casino alongside their token, right, to kind of bring the players even more into the ecosystem. And you talk a lot about this too, that you want you want to think about the lifetime value and bring people within the brand and so on. So curious to know, are you thinking about launching a token as well? What's your idea, strategy in general around launching a crypto casino? Communities center of this, but keen to hear around the token.
So first and foremost, the way I kind of positioned it is like we are crypto first company in that particular phase, right? What it means that, the moment when we get our first like license in, let's say, one of the European jurisdictions, this is where we just become like, a mainstream brand, like also fiat, etc. So in order to be able to build the next generation experience for our place, we will need a token for sure, because this is where I believe that a brand creates, like on top of the intangible attributes which I mentioned, like a proper set of belonging, which then can be like, in case of like Shuffle, can be staked, like sold, like so many different like use cases. But I want to go even deeper, because we're building the ecosystem where we have sports media assets, we will have some free-to-play assets, we will have the real money gaming product. I want to be able to connect everything all together. This is a very tough challenge, I must admit, and the last like 6 months I was like constantly thinking on like how this next token should look like. I don't have the answer now, right? But I still have time to be able to crack that puzzle. And in order to do that, we're now speaking with probably one of the 2 largest crypto funds in the world, beyond iGaming. Like one of them, they've never done even iGaming before, to be able to understand how to create, this best possible next utility token for not just an iGaming product, but like the way I called it, like the ultimate player engagement platform. So this is what I want to achieve. And I think, the last time I was chatting with Team Heat, like in Estonia, they built like this ecosystem where it's not just like you as the player, you go and stay in the hotel, you eat in your favorite restaurants, etc. So I'm thinking the same way, right? How do I create an utility which is becoming a part of like your daily lives outside of like your, usual like entertainment habits, like whether it's gambling or, like, I don't know, maybe buying food one day, etc. So phase 1 now is quite obvious, like to launch a brand, which we've done already. But phase 2 is where I'm yet to like feel the whole elements of that puzzle. And, the way it's like playing around, I honestly think this is going to be magnificent.
Mm-hmm. Really. And talk about like investment rounds. I mean, you mentioned you're speaking to some of the biggest like crypto investors and so on and so forth. Have you raised capital to start this operator brand? Like, what are the investors on your cap table? Interested to hear who are your partners in this venture.
We started with a team of 4 co-founders. So I'm being like the main kind of visionary co-founder behind this whole thing. And we funded it fully ourselves until we've raised, and we've raised only like August this year. I don't want to scare anyone with the valuation, because it's like the valuation which will definitely feel like everyone that the new beast is approaching. So so we've done like full, like I would call it pre-seed ourselves. We've invested, I think, more than 2.5 million ourselves up until we've raised some funds. So me and like the other co-founders, we raised funds to be able to drive like the very initial, I would call it like a version of Menace, which is now live. We're scaling to achieve like a certain, penetration in media, to ship the game provider, which is going live November 15th, to be able to drive the product, get a certain like, traction, early stage adoption, and then we, raise more, and then we scale more. So we have a huge interest, like as you mentioned, from like crypto funds, from mainstream funds, from like some of the biggest LPs in the industry, and we are very selective with, with whom soon we just really want to go further, because this is where the same I talked about the platform providers, the same mentality I want to have with our like shareholders and partners, where the people are aligned, and the most importantly, they are the OGs of the brand. They are like an essence of the brand. They are all the menaces the same way we kind of feel it and treat it, and they feel it the same way. So it's a very, I would call it like a sensitive and selective process right now, but we're blessed enough to be able to race with some of the OGs of the industry right now.
I mean, I've seen some recent crypto casinos popping up with some really incredibly high valuations, in the 30 to 40 million euro region, pre-launch, so on and so forth. I mean, I would imagine that maybe is around the.
Yeah. I would mention that but when we secure the next round, probably will be amongst like top 3 largest fundraisers in the startup history of iGaming.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Wow. Please send us the news first. We'll be happy to publish it.
Yeah, I will.
Brilliant, Dima. Very exciting on that front. Let's zoom out a little bit. So, as you mentioned at the beginning of this episode, you wear many hats, and one of those hats is Blask, where you have a really good overview over global markets and market trends. And so, obviously, as you are now planning to launch Menace, you have such a good overview over which markets to target, where there are most potential, so on and so forth. So I just want to ask you, a few years ago, Brazil just exploded, right? And it became the focus of the entire industry. It still is to some extent, If you think about the next 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 years out, are the markets, in your opinion, that stand out to be, let's say, the next Brazil, or is that train already passed and most markets are already kind of at some point in a maturity stage, or is there anything that any markets you look very, very closely to right now?
Yeah. So there is one particular, what you mentioned, country's maturity, which has been a very, very long and deep research we've done with the team at Blask, which kind of uncovered a lot of interesting trends about markets, especially UK or US or Brazil at some point. I feel like the way we're looking at iGaming right now is a little bit blurred with the revenue numbers, especially thinking, okay, Brazil, it's so huge. I mean, it is huge, right? It's like amongst the biggest markets in the world. But at the same time, if you look at it from the maturity point of view, it's tiny. And it's so young. And it's not young because it started a few years back, but it's young because of its penetration has not reached the critical mass of the audience. It's not yet category-led, something which very hard to explain, but it's coming as a very big research of Blask. So it's still probably 3 to 5 years away from probably it's midlife crisis.
Wow.
Right? So it's still early on. If you think about markets like UK, I think this is where it's so tricky that the market reached its paragon, and now with the current situation of the regulation, it's kind of biting its own tail. So the markets is being rebalanced heavily towards the offshore, and this is what's happening in a lot of European markets, right? I think it's a huge problem where players, they're becoming that savvy that the current offering of the operators within the regulated space is not being able to satisfy their needs, right? And the limits and everything. I'm a fan of responsible gambling, and we're doing a lot of things which is good for the industry with Blask as well. But I do believe that the product offering should fit the user's needs right now, and sometimes regulation is just slightly lagging behind. So the markets itself, I don't want to talk about specific markets, but I'd rather talk about market segments, because the way I'm looking at it right now is if something's happening in a particular region, then the whole region is going to blow up in a good way, right? So Spanish-speaking Latin America is probably going to be my number one choice. Many reasons why, the mobile, the mobile technologies, mobile money, payments, the usual standard microeconomical things. I don't want to talk too much about them, but, the whole kind of, time zone is growing heavily because of the huger interest in sports. We've seen like a crazy growth kind of spike when Messi started playing in, MLS for Miami. So it's becoming like a very interesting set of events which is now like driving the market forward. So I would place my number one bet there in this part of the world. I would say that within the next 2 to 3 years, the market will reach its like probably 60 to 70% of potential. So it's super early on. And then the second favorite, I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm a little bit crazy about saying that for the past 7 years now, Africa. So I honestly feel like if like going back to like 2018, I remember I was doing my marketing diploma. And it's funny enough that I was like in Chartered Institute of Marketing, and my diploma was how to enter a Nigerian market as an operator. So that was my diploma. Yeah, that's funny.
Talk about being married to the industry.
Yeah. So back then I was looking at the numbers and the markets. I was like, oh my God, it's so tiny. It has so much potential.
Yeah.
Few moments later, you have this like a crazy big market with so many great operators, you know, Bet Niger, Bet King, Sporty Bet, all these guys, they're huge. So, and I still believe that it's no longer there, right? Markets like Mozambique, markets like South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, these are brilliant markets. If done properly with the right, you know, set of like product, brand attributes in this region, I do believe that still there is a room for growth, and I would still put it as like one of the most potential interesting markets for the next years. And then probably the third one will be a mix of some smaller European jurisdictions. I really like Poland. That's a great market. I do like, you know, smaller markets like Romania, like Greece, for example. These are great markets, super competitive, by the way. But I do believe that, like, you know, if you come with the right offering, a right brand kind of, you know, product mix, you're going to be all right. I actually quite like the brand called Midnight. So these guys in the UK, so they've done it like exactly what I'm talking about. You know, a great distinctive brand, a great product, the way how they work with, you know, the whole user life cycle is truly remarkable.
Very interesting, yeah, to hear the breakdown in that regard. And, you know, I want to ask you about this kind of, something I'm thinking a lot about is the trends between, you know, white versus black. You know, we come from an industry that is born out of the gray, about ambiguity, but the markets are more and more becoming highly regulated, and there is not much room for gray anymore. It is white or black more and more and more. So it seems to me that as an operator, at some point you have to choose which side of the fence you want to be on. Good example recently, right? Is our friend Tim of YOLO, who came from the crypto world and now moving into a fully regulated strategy moving forward. On the one hand, you have regulated markets that are becoming tougher, stricter regulation, higher taxation. We see this almost daily, some jurisdictions that are increasing taxes, and it doesn't seem like that's slowing down. It seems to be constantly an evolving target. On the other hand, the gray markets, or the black markets rather, seems to be operating more freely, you know, but there is like a increase of enforcement in many jurisdictions, India, Japan, for example. How do you look at this trend? Where are things heading? Where will the industry be in a few years' time? You know, and how do you think about this trend overall? Yeah,
to be honest, I agree with everything you said. That I think there's not going to be gray anymore. I do feel like with more mature the industry becomes, the more distinctive either black or white becomes these days. Some countries which were never regulated before getting like a proper regulation framework. Some countries which were black, for example, considering, you know, implementation of certain like practices, etc. Like you mentioned, India, which went, you know, completely black hat overnight with like even canceling the whole gaming industry as well. Like, you know, it became like a nonsense for many, you know, who's watching the market. But I do feel like the black hat is here to stay anyway. It's not going to change. And the more technology evolves, I do feel like it's going to become like even a bigger issue, as long as the regulation not going to satisfy the player needs. Because if you think about, you know, the reason why actually regulation came in the first place, you need to make sure that the players are protected, they're playing in the safe and fully controllable environment. So let's go back and revisit the reason why the regulation came from. Is the current regulation in like certain markets are actually allowing players to be able to satisfy their needs? And the reason why offshore is becoming so huge is because the answer is no. So as long as that gap is becoming even bigger, then the black hat market size will grow. With the rise of technologies, VPNs, with all the like kind of workarounds and payments methods in like fiat, cards processing, the black market will stay. The players will find a way on how to do it, right? You go to Google, you just type in, you have like hundreds of options. Whether these options are great or not, that's a legit question, because at Blask, I think we've done a study where we have almost like 400 operators launching every week globally, but hold on a second, only 15% survive until the second month.
Oh, wow.
So what is happening with actually these operators? These are like pure scam companies.
Right.
They get deposits and they're gone tomorrow, right? Yeah. And just imagine the amount of impact it causes to the fair market over there, right? First and foremost, right? I'm not talking about, the reputation of the niche overall, right? So they say, okay, it's rigged, it's scammed, and you will never get your money out there. So, and I feel like the more educated players they become, they go and look at, okay, I got this option, I got that option. Why do I choose that one? I don't want to like torture myself. Like, why would I use this products where I don't have a choice to play my favorite games? I don't have a choice to spend as much time as I want, right? So I do feel like I agree with you, there is a black and white, but at the same time, the gap between black and white might become even bigger if we're not gonna listen to what players actually want.
And let's say you wake up tomorrow, Dima, now you're the head of the UKGC all of a sudden, and you're tasked to fix this problem, like really and truly. We talk a lot about the industry, talk a lot about the regulators doing the wrong thing. How would you protect the regulated environment? How would you ensure that the black market has as little space as possible in the UK? If you were the head of the regulator, let's say, what would you do? What is what is actual truly good measures to thwart the black market?
To be honest, I think this is like the most unexpected and the best question I've ever had in all of the podcasts in my lifetime. Thank you for that. I mean, obviously, and this is like whole, like raw, unprepared, unfiltered. So I really kind of like it. So I would go and chat with players. I would just go myself as the head of regulator or head of UKGC. I would just go to the darkest places in London, to the pubs, getting drunk with all these people, talking with them about their betting habits, their behavior, what they like, what they do, what they like to do, and listen to players, listen to consumers, because as I believe, the main role of the regulator is to create the environment where you're safe to gamble, you're taken care of, you're not being scammed, and everyone is happy. Taxes are paid, and players are satisfied, and this is where everyone is just working for the same sake of the industry we have right now. So this is what I would have done, the first thing. The second thing, you need to understand the second side. Businesses, right? So you need to go and speak with operators, understand more about their economy, how much they pay into providers, how much of a GGR they make from players, like understand the whole economy life cycle of the operator, understand, okay, if I put like X amount of percentage on GGR, they will never survive. Why anyone would build a business like that, which is not making money? This is like, not a charity project at some point, right? So you need to listen to them and understand what's going on there. I would go the same way, just like pick top 10 operators, top smallest 10 operators, and just go and chat with them. Maybe try to understand their pain points. Obviously hear them more about the black hat side of the market. And then the last thing I would have done is understand what creates that gap, what drives that gap to become even more significant. Is this player limits or bonusing or variety of games? And I would have tried to understand, okay, the player side, we understand what they want. The black hat side, we understand what drives the black hat market size and the player adoption. So how do we marry all these changes into operators, and how do we make sure that these businesses survive, they grow, and do the most responsible marketing in the country? So this is how I would have done it.
So I just saw the news that the Swedish head of regulator, she just left her position today, actually. So Dima, if the Swedish regulator is listening, here you have your replacement. And if you have any space open in your busy day.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Dima, to start rounding things off today, very exciting times ahead with Menace. I'm very excited to follow the journey. In 3 years' time, when we sit here again at the RedCore next podcast at the event, and we talk about where we are at the moment, that would be my first question to you. What do you expect the answer to be? Well, where will you be in 3 years' time with Menace?
Okay, that's a good one. I would say that the bare minimum 15 countries launched, fully regulated, thousands and tens of thousands of daily active users combined. Great product, which is like in-house, where I'm satisfied with all the key components of that product. And this is like a very, very tough thing to do because I'm very picky. I'm very, crazy when it comes down to like product details. So thing number 2. Thing number 3, we are ranked amongst top 5 biggest sports media companies in the world on social media, maybe top 3. I would say top 5 for sure, top 3 at least. We have world's best team, the best C-level of all times, the best like customer service of all times. It's very hard to measure, but I have a set of ways on how to measure it. So great team, great product, and the most importantly, player satisfaction rate. So I want to make sure that if you go on social media or you kind of, get any random players who played on Menace once in their lives, they would say, I loved it. That's my main KPI.
I love that, Dima. Absolutely inspiring to hear. This has been a masterclass in the iGaming industry as a whole and brand building in particular. Thank you so much, Dima. I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
And excited to follow the journey.
Thank you so much for having me. I absolutely enjoyed this conversation, and it's always great to speak with you because, like as I said, you're probably one of the biggest thought leaders in this industry. And a set of questions you came up with today is like honestly making my head spin, which is the best possible example of how good the content is.
I like making people confused, Dima.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you.